What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and there's only one God in the Marvel Universe that the one above all fears. This is the Storm comic. We're continuing on. So what this does is this initially picks up at the far reaches of the universe in the near future. And it's really cool the way this plays out, right? So initially you pick up with the Silver Surfer, and he says, "You fought well. Please allow me to borrow your weapon, to borrow your strength, and add it to mine." And literally we're told, imbued with both the power cosmic and the fiery fury of Surtur's Twilight Sword, Norrin Radd is one of the most powerful beings in the universe, the Silver Surfer Soot. He has the strength to rip through a black hole cluster, the stamina to battle a pantheon of gods for 1,000 years, and the ability to traverse the vacuum of deep space at speeds faster than light, more durable than diamond, but nevertheless remarkably endowed with self-restoration. Yet this being, whose presence alone strikes fear into the hearts of trillions, answers to an even greater power, Galactus, the devourer of worlds. With a raging appetite, he consumes our entire galaxy. Stars and planets combined would not quell the hunger of this insatiable behemoth. But even the cosmic ravager known as Galactus answers to another, the universe plague, the Black Winter, the devourer of realms, the Rot Storm. Now, the Black Winter is amazing. It was introduced in Donny Cates' run. It's not the god that the one above all fears, just to clarify that. And neither is the guy that we're going to be talking about here in a second. But the Black Winter, in the same way that Galactus has his heralds in order to consume different planets, the Black Winter was originally introduced as a multiversal version of Galactus. And it was Donny Cates kind of rewriting Galactus's history a little bit to basically say that while the Black Winter was not responsible for his creation, at least not as far as I remember, that the Black Winter used Galactus in different universes as heralds to seek out new realities for the Black Winter to consume, because he would consume entire universes. Ultimately, it was seemingly defeated. And one of the cool things is that when we were first introduced to it, it basically destroyed the DC universe. It was kind of nuts. But this thing is called Ender, right? And we're told Enders, before they can reach our universe, must pass through the Oblivion void. Many Enders who have dared try have met their swift ends instead at the hands of the most powerful of the primordials, Oblivion. The always been, the always will be. Oblivion, the fearsome cosmic Leviathan. Now here's a crazy thing, right? For those of you guys who are Oblivion fans, this is huge because it's basically Marvel confirming that Oblivion is the most powerful of all the cosmic entities that exist out there. But he's not the god that the one above all is afraid of. So getting into that, we kind of have to build up to it. And so what it does is it picks up with Storm. Now, Storm initially is here in the Amazon rainforest. And the reason why is because she was summoned there by Tony Stark. They're literally trying to recreate the super soldier serum. And essentially there's a crazy storm that caused the helicopter to crash and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, her help is needed in bringing this storm to an end. And so Storm, now imbued with a fraction of eternity's power, because she's the eternal storm now, right? That happened previously. There's a playlist if you need to get caught up. She rides into this place, into the Amazon rainforest, destroys this serpent, and then is immediately met by storm gods. Now, here's a cool thing about what's going on here, right? That what Marvel's doing is they're kind of reworking the storm god mythos to a degree. And we'll find out why here in a minute, because it's really cool. But the writer of this story, right, Hadad, which I think is how you pronounce it. I'm probably going to butcher that every time I try to pronounce it. I really should ask them like how you pronounce their name. But they're reworking this because what you do is when Storm deals with this serpent right off the bat, she's immediately met by a combination of wildly powerful beings. In fact, one of the things she specifies here, she says all the air molecules around us have been replaced with solely oxygen molecules. And that one of the gods who shows up here is Sango. Now, this is actually a misspelling. Sango is actually Shango, at least if I remember correctly. This is an old school character in Marvel Comics. He's been around for a very, very long time, and he's actually a member of a race called the Voodoo. He appeared back in Thor Annual number 10 in 1982 as a kind of coming together of these gods that were designed to face off against the Demogorgon, and they ultimately lost. They were consumed, and Thor basically saved them. But the way these guys work as a member of the Voodoo is they're not that dissimilar from like Odin and Zeus and all those guys. Now, I don't know if they exist in like real world mythology, so I can't really speak to that. But in the same way that like Odin and Zeus and those guys have their own creation stories of how they came into existence, but they're effectively extra dimensional beings that exist in dimensions that are adjacent to Earth, but within the universe itself, the Vodou are the same way. The Vodou are actually a byproduct of Gaia and Balaku, I think is how you pronounce his name. But the two of them procreated and produced their own offspring. Much like the Asgardians and the Olympians, over time, the Vodou began to become more involved in the affairs of mortal men, to the point that they were actually worshipped by a lot of West Africans prior to Bast. And so once Bast came along and the Black Panther mythos rose up, then a lot of people began to worship her instead of the Vodou. And I'm not aware that it caused any kind of rivalry or anything like that. And in fact, a lot of worship for the Vodou ended up switching over to the Caribbean. But the fact is, they've been around for quite some time. And so they're kind of like an African version of Thor and Odin or Zeus and Hercules and that kind of thing. But in reality, we haven't really seen a lot of what they're capable of. And so in a lot of ways, it's a kind of clean slate on how to rework these guys. They show up here and immediately unleash hell on Storm. And it's crazy because in a lot of ways, while Storm does have the ability to manipulate the weather, and that's amplified even further with her newfound powers, the truth is that she's not really a god. She calls herself a god and other people have worshipped her as a god, but there's a big difference between being a god and being just a really powerful mutant. The gods usually derive from some other dimension. They come from some place that is not Earth. Pretty much all gods in Marvel Comics are like that. But again, that's not a universal rule, because when you have people like Chthon and Sidorak and so on who are elder gods, they initially arrived on Earth. So again, it's really just the fact that Storm is a mutant that removes her from being a tried and true god. But truth to tell, when you're talking about powers on this scale, as if there's a difference. Now, what makes this so crazy is Storm is able to hold her own against these guys. She does not defeat them, and that's an important distinction to understand here. Even with the newfound powers that she has, she holds her own for quite a little bit, but then realizes the longer this battle goes on, the more likely she is to lose her life just due to the sheer amount of power they possess and the amount of power that she has, and the fact that it's kind of like a war of attrition. And so literally when one of them grabs her hair with the intention of killing her, she just cuts herself loose using her sword and then teleports away. And she ends up going back to her sanctuary in Rio de Janeiro. And she says, literally, call Iron Man, tell him his weather anomaly will soon come to an end. Tell him I will bring him the remains of the pilot, even if I have to sieve through every flake of ash in that jungle and fetch my armor and blade. I am going god hunting. And so when she intends to leave, Thor arrives on the scene. And so Thor says, no, right? You do not need to do this. There's a lot more going on regarding why these gods attacked you than you've initially been led to believe. And so as Storm and Thor start having this conversation, Storm kind of fills him in on what's going on, right? And that's why she says the cremated remains of the pilot and his devourer when they come across what's kind of like this urn, so to speak. And she says Dr. Voodoo, as a necromancer, should be able to distinguish the remains so the pilot can be laid to rest with his family, because that's one of the tasks that Storm was sent on, right? To retrieve the pilot so he can be buried properly. And so that's why Thor says, whatever it is you have to do to prepare Midgard, do it quickly. For in my travels, I have learned a great deal about our kind. Before Zeus, before any of the storm gods, there was another, Hadad the First. Now here's the crazy thing about this. Hadad does exist in Marvel Comics. He was created by Peter David and originally appeared in Tower of Shadows number 7 back in 1970, but he was never a guy that was on this level of what we're going to be talking about here. He was powerful, he's a Mesopotamian god, but never on this level. Because what Thor says is Hadad the First, he grew so mighty that he wove eternity as his cloak and forged death into his war club. The Phoenix Force was his armor, and infinity was his shield. By then, none could defeat him but one, the one above all. And when it appears, it simply says, creature, what have you done to my children? And so Thor says, Hadad will return in days to come, and with him a horde of rot storms. So quite literally, a horde of black winters, right? A whole host of those guys are going to show up, universe consumers, destroyers. And that's when you switch back to that moment with the Silver Surfer where he says, rot blizzard, spew Galactus out. And again, you kind of jump back and forth with these moments because because Thor says a civil war brews across pantheons, storm gods against storm gods, a thunder war, those who seek to stop Hadad and those who would seek to hasten his return rage against one another. The storm gods who attacked you, I do not know which faction they belong to, but I am certain they will be back when you least expect them to. But when they do, armor up, unsheath your blade, and summon me with this, and together we shall make them rue the day they made an enemy of Aurora Monroe. And Storm actually refuses the offer, and it's like, when that time comes, I will face off against them directly. Now again, because Storm is on the side of infinity, what appears to be going on here is creation versus anti-creation, right? The end of things. Because infinity and eternity represent kind of two sides of the same coin, but effectively time and space and the universe itself. Whereas Oblivion, as you guys know, represents the absence of existence. But Oblivion far outstrips eternity and power. So if Oblivion truly just wanted to destroy any eternity that exists out there in the universe, up to and potentially even including the multiversal eternity, Oblivion could just do it. But it's possible that that would simply upset the natural order of things, and so it's kind of a roundabout way, sort of finding a loophole to lead to the destruction of everything. We don't necessarily know the answer to that question. I am excited to see, right, what happens, but following that, Storm's story actually shifts, and it's kind of a drastic shift, the way that it happens. Not entirely sure why this choice was made, but I love it. Because what goes on is Storm is actually summoned to the FBI. And when she gets here, she's initially interrogated by somebody who's named Special Agent Fabi, right? And they say, I would like to ask you some questions. And they even say, behind the two-way mirror, we have an independent observer from the Office of National Emergency, Agent Lundqvist. But I'm sure you could already sense him with your powers. Now, the Office of National Emergency is a really cool concept. And in fact, the whole idea behind it, and really where they rose to prominence the most in Marvel, was in the aftermath of House of M. If you guys ever saw those comic book panels where you had Sentinels stationed outside the Xavier Institute after House of M, those were O1E Sentinels. They're actually man-powered Sentinels, right? So that's kind of what differentiates the O1E Sentinels from regular Sentinels. But again, kind of continuing on, this guy says, remember, at any point during the questioning, the Fifth Amendment is always available to you. So do not feel pressured to give me an answer at all times. If I stood the risk of a 5-year sentence in a supervillain correctional facility, I would choose my words carefully too. However, your answers, or lack thereof, will be considered during the course of our investigation. Lastly, I'm originally from a planet with a more nitrogen-rich atmosphere, so pardon me if I sometimes inhale from my nitrogen tank while we discuss. Shall we begin? And this is kind of wild, right? Because what they do is they ask the question, what are your emission policies for the Storm Sanctuary, right? And Storm says, like, the whole Storm Sanctuary was built by Tony Stark, Lunella Lafayette, and Shuri, daughter of T'Chaka, to emit no greenhouse gases. And she even provides evidence that this is the case. And that's how a lot of these questions get answered, with a lot of factual information. Storm is nothing if not meticulous in Marvel Comics. So the next question, are you a fugitive? And Storm's just kind of like, okay, where is this going? Because technically speaking, she is, and she has been for most of her life. That the statement is made, you are famously a former thief on the streets of Cairo. You wear it like a badge of honor. So I ask, have you faced punishment for your past crimes? Do you see the need to submit yourself to a working legal system? Now, that's one of the crazy things about Storm's origin, that when she was a little girl and she was a thief, that's when she first met Xavier. If you go and you read the original Storm miniseries, it covers that, right? It's her whole backstory, even going so far as to demonstrate that she was in love with T'Challa at one point. And because of the fact that he had to basically become the Black Panther, right? Duty came before love. They couldn't be together. So it's actually a really, really cool bit of history for her character. One of the best parts of Storm's history, to be honest with you. Now, of course, eventually her powers manifest. She goes on to become kind of the Storm Goddess in Africa. And then ultimately she's found by Xavier and joins the X-Men team in Giant Size X-Men #1. But by and large, she never really faced any punishment for her crimes when she was a thief. And that's why she says, I'm happy to provide you with answers. However, my relationship with the Egyptian criminal justice system is not the prerogative of the United States of America. And so that's where this person says, all right, I can play that game. And so they say, I will need a report of your activities within the last 6 weeks. The response to Storm: the impossible city of the Avengers documents everything I do with the team. Here's what I've been doing for the last 6 weeks. So apparently somehow, during all the pandemonium and fighting these old storm gods for whatever reason they want to destroy her, she's been taking notes, which is kind of wild. But the response of this person is, however, this is all really impressive and everything, but I would like to know more about the activities where you were not the hero, but the victim. And I'm not talking about your recent visit to Doomstat. You've made it abundantly clear that whatever happens outside of this country is beyond our jurisdiction. So let's start off easy. Have you been kidnapped within the last 6 weeks while you were in the United States of America? And she says no. And they say, we feared that you would say that. We believe you were recently under psychic influence and your memories of the event may have been telepathically altered. Now, here's something that I actually wasn't aware of in Marvel, and I had to look it up to verify it. Right? I was just like, wait, what? So she says, I am immune to telepathy. We long discovered my friends Gambit and Jubilee are immune to telepathy because of the latent energy that's always surging through their bodies and brains. I endeavor to always maintain the same to keep myself immune to telepathic control. Full transparency, I didn't know that Jubilee and Gambit were immune to telepathy. I knew that Gambit had a resistance to it, but I didn't know that it was full-on immunity, right? That's kind of wild. It's awesome. Like, almost 30 years I've been reading Marvel Comics, guys. I learn something new every day. It's nuts, right? But this person says, do I have your permission to examine this hypothesis of yours? Storm takes their hand and Storm says, you may. And then of course this guy gets up and says, I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time. The telepathy simulation machine is right next door. The procedure would only take 5 minutes. And Storm immediately looks around and says, this isn't real, right? And they're like, what are you talking about? And she's like, this is not real. This moment, after you held my hand, none of it's real. Greater beings than you have tried to invade my mind and failed. And immediately they send Storm flying against the wall and just start laughing, right? And so they say, so you harbored the fugitive Charles Xavier and assisted his escape off-world of your own free will. What did you think was going to happen? The streets of Cairo all over again? You were just going to be able to walk away from it all and face no consequences? No, there are consequences for one's actions in the adult world, in America, in my America. And they say, Aurora Monroe, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So in addition to everything else that's going on, that because of her actions in the events of X-Manhunt, effectively getting Xavier out of jail, or at least kind of how it seemed to be, that now she has to worry about being arrested. A fugitive from the United States of America. Thank God her reservation is down in South America somewhere. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. It is kind of crazy what's going on. I love that 2 stories are being told at the same time, but if I'm being honest with you guys, I'm really just kind of excited to see the Thunder War and the war among the cosmic entities, because it looks like it's going to be dope. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.